Okay, imagine waking up one morning, grabbing your phone to check your bank account, and the number staring right back at you is zero. Not because you went on some wild spending spree, and definitely not because you made a terrible investment, but because the government stepped in literally overnight and froze everything. Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a fascinating and honestly deeply important historical reality about the very nature of wealth. We're going to break down the exact assets that historically sit completely outside of institutional reach. Now, before you write off that opening scenario as some crazy internet conspiracy theory, you really need to know that this actually happened to real Americans in living memory. And the wildest part? The people who lost everything weren't the ones being reckless with their money. Not at all. They were ordinary, hardworking folks who did everything right. They saved, they followed the rules, and they trusted the system completely. But the people who came out fine on the other side, they owned a very specific set of assets. Okay, let's dive into this. This right here is the psychological trap almost all of us fall into without even realizing it's happening. When we think about keeping our money safe, our brains automatically picture a bank, right? We trust the dollar because, well, we've always used it. But we're constantly confusing the everyday familiarity of these institutions with actual fundamental safety. Let's look at how this builds in real, documented American history. If we go back to 1933, the country was deep in the Great Depression. Banks were failing left and right. And then President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. That order literally made it entirely illegal for American citizens to own gold. The government essentially told every single American to hand over their gold directly to the state.
And if you didn't, the penalty was absolutely staggering. Refusing to hand over your gold meant facing a $10,000 fine and up to 10 years in prison. 10 years! Just for owning gold. So people complied because they simply felt they had no choice. It just goes to show not all assets are created equal. Some sit entirely inside the government's reach and some do not.
Part 1. The 5 protected assets backed by history. So asset number 1 is physical gold and silver. Yes, the exact same gold that was confiscated back in 1933. But the absolutely crucial word here is physical. We're talking about gold you can actually hold in your own 2 hands, stored somewhere completely outside the banking system. After that 1933 order was finally repealed in 1974, Americans actually regained the legal right to own it again. Today, physical gold and silver in your own personal possession are not registered assets. There's no database the government checks, there's no account they can suddenly freeze, and there's absolutely no middleman who can just hit a button and hand it over. You know, a bank account is really just a number on a screen that can be erased with a keystroke. But a physical coin? That has a proven 5,000-year track record as a store of wealth. And hey, if gold is a bit too pricey, silver works the exact same way and offers a super accessible entry point for under $30. Moving on to asset number 2, physical cash held entirely outside a bank. Now, this one sounds almost too simple, which is exactly why most people totally ignore it. But just look at recent history. During the 2008 financial crisis, or over in Greece in 2015 when ATMs literally limited withdrawals to just $67 a day. Think about that. When digital systems freeze up and credit cards get declined, having actual cash in your hand becomes an absolute lifeline. There's an old saying for this. A stack of 20s doesn't need Wi-Fi to work. I love that. Now, keeping massive amounts of cash long-term isn't really a smart wealth-building strategy, mostly because inflation is going to eat away its value over time. But as a short-term crisis buffer, having a few months of living expenses tucked securely away at home provides ultimate liquidity and survival power when the digital grid goes down. Now, what's really interesting about this next one is asset number 3 involves a federal law you might actually already be using. It's called ERISA, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. Under ERISA, a lot of employer-sponsored retirement accounts, like your standard 401ks, actually have incredibly strong protections from creditors. In most bankruptcy situations, these accounts are basically an off-limits vault. Individual IRAs also have massive federal protections, up to over $1.5 million. So this wealth is legally shielded. While the government can obviously tax your withdrawals later, that's fundamentally different from them just confiscating the asset entirely. Moving right along to asset number 4, we really have to look at a striking historical contrast: paper wealth versus hard assets. See, there's a pattern that repeats itself in pretty much every major financial crisis throughout history. Paper wealth, which is basically just promises and numbers sitting on ledgers, tends to vanish. But hard assets, things that physically exist in the real world, like real estate, farmland, and commodities,
they survive. Just look at this incredible historical example from the 1920s Weimar Republic over in Germany. Hyperinflation got so unimaginably bad that a literal wheelbarrow full of cash couldn't even buy a single loaf of bread. No way, right? But the people who owned farmland, they survived. Why? Well, because land produces food, and food has intrinsic value no matter what the national currency happens to be doing that week. Whether it's income-producing real estate, farmland, or just owning your own home free and clear, hard assets promise one core thing: existence. They are still going to be there on the other side of the crisis.
Asset number 5 is self-custody crypto. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about wild price predictions or some get-rich-quick scheme. It is strictly about the self-custody aspect, holding cryptocurrency in a personal digital wallet where only you hold the private key, completely outside of any third-party exchanges. This represents something genuinely, literally new in human financial history. It's wealth that exists purely in math and code. For thousands of years, wealth always had some sort of physical choke point, right? Gold could be seized at borders, property could be taken. But a 12-word seed phrase memorized in your head, that allows you to access your wealth from anywhere on Earth without any institution's permission. Just remember, the big trade-off for this lack of third-party control is extreme personal responsibility. If you lose that phrase, the wealth is gone for good. Part 2, the underlying pattern, escaping control. And this brilliantly illustrates the entire concept we're talking about today. Every single one of these assets actively avoids a single point of failure. Think about it. Physical gold and silver sit outside the banks. Physical cash sits entirely outside the digital infrastructure. IRA accounts are legally shielded. Hard assets exist in the real physical world, not just on a ledger. And self-custody crypto is mathematically outside institutional reach. Every decade or so, the financial system gets stressed, the rules change super fast, and institutions reach for whatever tools they can to survive. But these assets, they sit safely outside that reach. Part 3, your protection playbook, and the practical steps you can take. The really good news here is you absolutely do not need to go full survivalist or build a bunker to create genuine financial protection. You just need to follow this staggered, really actionable framework. Start with the basics. Step 1, do you have a physical buffer of liquid cash? Just a few months of expenses kept safely outside a bank. Step 2, are you maximizing those legal vaults, taking full advantage of your ERISA-protected accounts and any employer matches? And step 3, does your long-term plan include hard assets like real estate? Build this solid foundation first before you even think about moving into the more advanced layers like precious metals or self-custody crypto. All of this brings us to the entire philosophy of this explainer. The goal isn't to bet against the system. The goal is to never be entirely dependent on any single layer of it. Those hardworking Americans who were completely wiped out back in 1933 weren't stupid. Not at all. They simply had all their eggs in one basket. And unfortunately for them, that basket was made entirely of paper. At the end of the day, financial education isn't just about making a quick buck, right? It's about understanding the very nature of money itself. Every single generation inevitably faces a moment when the financial rules change, usually without any warning. And the people who actually survive those moments are the ones who proactively built layers of defense and asked the right questions long before the crisis even hit. By watching this explainer today, you are already asking those exact questions. If this helped you see your wealth a little differently, make sure you subscribe so we can explore even more ways to build real, untouchable financial security together. Because you never know, the next explainer might just be the one that changes everything for you.